Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay, and here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go through the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, all the everyday language that you know and use in your native languages and native countries of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. So if you have topics, if you have suggestions of things that we haven't covered before, please write them either here in the chat or email Nefesh B'Nefesh directly. You can access all of our previous lessons on youtube.com. Just type in Cafe Oleh, you'll see a playlist with all of our previous lessons up there. And now our lessons will include on youtube.com, we'll include a link to that week's vocabulary spreadsheet. So for the last two lessons, i.e. the beginning of this session, you should have a link in the YouTube. You should have a link in the YouTube clip with the corresponding sheet of vocabulary. We're working on the kinks in getting that out, and this new iteration of Cafe Oleh that soon is going to include in-person classes here in Israel. Stay tuned for more details about that. As always, we are going to get started. I see a lot of people have a lot of things they want me to know in the chat. That's wonderful. Remember that I'm only going to be looking at the Q&A for questions that are directly related to this lesson. If you have questions, concerns about anything, someone repeatedly gets confused, for example, why we call this series Café Oleh. O-L-E-H, that also sounds like Oleh in French, but in Hebrew, Oleh means an immigrant. So Cafe Oleh, immigrant cafe, you could call it, however you'd like to think about it. It's a cute play on words. You don't need to think about it more than that, folks. Glad to be here these past 5 years calling it Cafe Oleh. If you have questions about the specific lesson we're about to do, please write it in the Q&A. Anything else, please write it in the chat. My colleagues at Nefesh B'Nefesh will be in the chat room, both helping you with your questions, and we'll also get back to you if you have ideas for future lessons. With that, let's get started with today's class. Today's class is a repeat, and it's a repeat in terms of topic, not in terms of the content we're going to cover. And the topic is media literacy. This is one of my favorite lessons to cover, and I know based on the feedback we get from you, it is yours as well. Why do we do this every 4 to 6 weeks? Because two main reasons. One, sorry, a little distracting with everyone's comments in the chat as I'm trying to speak and look at the camera right now, but thank you for writing into the chat box. Why is this important? Number one, Israelis consume news all the time. Whether it's on TV, radio, internet, SMSs, WhatsApp, whatever it is, they're glued to media outlets, used to hearing the news at the top of the hour, the latest news, because this is a country where things change pretty fast. Everyone knows what's happening in the news. Everyone certainly wants to have an opinion about what's happening in the news, even if they're not the most caught up. That's number one. Number two, and this part I especially stress towards my fellow Olim here and in general, English language media that is created here in Israel, news outlets like Haaretz in English, Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, I-24, ILTV, all the ones that you may consume on a regular basis are not made for local consumption. Okay, the amount of information that's relevant to a local audience and that gets regularly updated is going to be found in Hebrew and to an extent in Arabic and Russian. In English, there is no media outlet yet that can deliver news at the same speed, but also the same relevancy for a local audience like the Hebrew and Arabic outlets do. How do I know this? Something broke about 5 hours ago, which we're going to cover shortly. And just before coming on tonight, I did a quick survey of some of the bigger English language media outlets to see if they were covering it. No one had covered it yet. It was the front page news of one of the media outlets we're about to look at for most of the afternoon. That's what I'm talking about here. It's breaking news, and it has a lot to do with local politics, which we're going to get to in a second, but also all sorts of other things that don't get covered because they're simply not relevant, right? If you're consuming news about Israel from North America, it's not going to be so relevant to know that there's a traffic accident right now, or that a building is on fire in central Tel Aviv. Okay, so it's important to, as locals, as newfound Israeli citizens, to know how to access the news, how to read the news, but how to read the news correctly. And I'm not saying word for word, right? This class has a lot of intro students in it, and together we're going to look at the anatomy of media every 4 to 6 weeks, what a top of the media page looks like, news outlets, how to look at the things you need to focus on, where to focus, and what things you can do a deep dive on, and what things you can just quickly glance over and move on to, as well as the context of what's being spoken. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen as normal, as usual. As always, you're allowed to screenshot. You are welcome to screenshot, old school pen and paper. As I said, you will be getting a list of this vocabulary along with the recording of this class on YouTube in the next few days. So if you aren't fast enough to take notes or don't know how to screenshot, don't worry, you'll get a copy of this as well. First, I want to show you the top of a page and what it looks like. Okay, so this is the vocabulary for today, but hold on. Just get this down here. There we go. Okay, this is Ynet. Ynet is the online version of Yediot Achronot. Yediot Achronot is one of Israel's oldest and most popular newspapers. Back in the day when people actually read print newspapers, Yediot for many, many, many years was the most popular one. It's considered middle of the road, not too politically motivated one way or another. Its language level is, I would say, average. It's not high level Hebrew. It's also not basic Hebrew. It's somewhere in the middle. Also, and then this became one of the biggest online outlets when news started becoming more available online and less people were reading in print. Ynet is their portal, not just for news, but as we'll shortly see, all sorts of other things that they do here in Israel. This is the front page, ynet.co.il. And as you see, there's a couple important things you're going to see on all media outlets in Israel. First off, the requisite banner ad. They got to make money somehow. And this, like many other pages, does not let you block ads without paying for it. So I let at least some of the ads fly, right? Here we have here, so ynet.co.il. You have here at the top, first off, the logo. You have here on the right-hand side, 3 different things. We're going to start with this one here on the left, where you see the sun. That is the temperature, right? That is, you can change that also if I wanted to. I'm here in Tel Aviv. So if you click on it, I will get the forecast for Tel Aviv. That's pretty straightforward. Everything else you see here, we're only going to look at just a few bits of the most important parts that you wanting to know. Do I need to understand what's happening in Hebrew immediately, or can I take a break from it, or can I read this in English? It's not as urgent, or I can use Google Translate for a 50% accurate translation. So first off, the red bar here is the table of contents. It tells you all the different departments that they have. So starting from right to left, Roshi means main, or Roshi, like Rosh, head. Ynet Plus is their premium subscription service, so it has more feature articles, more in-depth articles, things that aren't necessarily breaking news, but they're more in-depth pieces. Chadashot, news. Radio, Ynet now has its own live radio, both as a podcast as well as live radio. They also do live, they have a studio within Ynet that they also do video live broadcasts as well. Sport, you'll see a lot of these words are cognates because we don't use, if there are words in Hebrew, we just don't use them, and we're more used to using the cognates like radio for radio and sport for sports, or sport as non-American English speakers will call it. Kalkala, again, moving right to left, kalkala is the economy. It's usually the business section. Tarbut, culture. Rechilut, gossip, celebrity gossip. in this case, bריאות, health, rechev, vehicle, meaning cars, digital, anything that has to do with high tech and startups. Laisha, Laisha is a popular women's magazine here in Israel, and Ynet, it's part of the Ynet conglomerate. Ochel, food, od, more. So if you click on this, you'll see even more, all sorts of things that you can find here on Ynet. And you can see here also, there's Kalkalis, which is Ynet's business newspaper, which is very good. The business newspapers I often recommend to read a lot, especially the English versions, because they're just so a little bit better written and more in depth. Ynet News. Some of you may know ynetnews.com. I'm here to tell you that ynetnews.com is not a good source of news as Israeli citizens, meaning living here in Israel. If you need to know what's going on in Israel on a regular basis, you're going to need to read it in Hebrew. Ynet News picks and chooses which pieces to translate into English, not such great English, mind you. And oftentimes it's not updated for days, not just hours, days. So I highly recommend not reading ynetnews.com. There's one in Espanol, in Spanish. Vesti is Russian. Ynet Yad Shniya is a great real estate search engine for those of you looking anything from apartments to buy and rent to also just everyday things that need to be sold. Think of it like Craigslist. Mischakim, games, Frogi, which is for kids, all sorts of stuff here on Ynet. But let's get to the top. You're always going to see this running banner at the top, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 articles at any given time, and you'll see it scroll by as it goes. These are what we call in Hebrew mivzakim. Mivzakim, breaking news. Okay, so these are the latest stories to hit the press, and you'll see it based on the timestamp. And you'll see, for example, here is the black line. That black line indicates the oldest breaking news piece and the newest. So 7:59. This was just a few minutes ago, and it's talking about again, חשד, שני תושבי באר שבע איימו עם מוט ברזל על רכז ביטחון בנגב שהעיר להם. Okay, so if I hover over this, I'll get a little bit the intro paragraph to the article, and I'll see if this is relevant or not. I can also tell just by looking at the headline, is this relevant? I don't live in Be'er Sheva. I live in Tel Aviv, so I can scroll ahead. I don't need to necessarily consume all pieces of news. But you see, if I hover over it, it stops it, so I can read both the headline and the short piece here, and so forth. I can read Lechol HaMivzakim. If I press here on the left, I will get a running list of all the breaking news for the last several hours, if not the whole day. You see here? And so I can click on any of these with the arrow, and I get that same small description. So if I didn't catch it in time, right, or if I want to translate it more, or if those of you who aren't as fluent want to use Google Translate or a better translation service, you could do that. You could go in here, cut and copy this into a translation service and get it if you needed to know it. What I'm going to show you today is how to read the news so that you don't have to cut and copy and translate every single word. Okay, so first off, it's important to know for you yourselves, what are the important issues that affect you or that you want to keep up with, and know those vocabulary words. And that's as simple as picking up a dictionary or using an online dictionary and finding the words that are important to you. Okay, so if it's economy, it's kalkala. If it's politics, whatever it is, and what are the keywords, just like you do in English or in French or in whatever your native language is, right? There are keywords that you always look for in the news. Do the same thing when you're reading Hebrew. Don't look at this as something you have to translate from top to bottom, because as you'll see, Ynet is a big outlet and it keeps going and going and going and going and going. And each of these is a link to another article. Don't feel overwhelmed with this. Even at level Aleph Hebrew, okay? Even at the most introductory Hebrew, you can get through this page. You already know where the table of contents is. You already know where the breaking news is. Now we look at the top stories. First off, the top story on Ynet will always look like this. Picture on the left that illustrates it. Headline in bold letters under the date. The date is in both Gregorian and Hebrew calendars, right? On the right-hand side, Gregorian, secular as we call it in Israel, Jewish calendar on the left, or Hebrew calendar as some people call it, the headline, the short description, and if you click on any part of this, you will get to the article, the full article. Under this, you'll see the next 3 to 4 highlighted articles. Usually it's the next important articles or ones that were recently featured as the top headline. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, just like on other outlets in other languages, one line headline, short description. You choose whether you want to read it or not. Okay. We're going to go through what was leading as the lead story for this afternoon today. Very much today's news, because that's how important this is, but also how quickly the news changes, right? I could have taken a screenshot and we did something from the other day. It's already old news. I want to focus on things that you can keep up with the news. Again, really simple. And I'm going to show you how to read the news and what are the important things to look for. So first off, the article we're going to be referencing is no longer this headline, although it's an important headline. It's one that's over here. Okay, so it's still there. It's still in the news section. If I were to go to Chadashot, you would see this article pop up. But when I was creating today's lesson, I took a screenshot of that same top headline with the picture and things, and you're going to see how we're going to deconstruct this together. So let me just pull this up again. There we go. Okay, so you see here on the left-hand side, right? It is the exact same thing that we saw before. It is the exact same format. Banner, breaking news at the top, the Mivzakim. See here, you see a banner that has a link to their Ynet radio. They're really trying to push that now. And then you see here the main headline, which was this afternoon. In big, bold letters on the right-hand side, short description under it, illustrated picture on the left. Okay, we're going to focus on the headline and the short description under it. I'm going to try to zoom it in as best as I can, folks, so bear with me just a second. There we go. Okay, and what we're going to do together is read this. We're going to understand it, and we're going to understand what are the keywords when I'm reading the news to understand how the news is written and where to focus on. Now, normally, like any media outlet, the headline is going to be short and pithy and catchy. So I'm going to read the headline and we're going to translate it together, and we're going to use some of the vocab that I picked out. You'll see here red, underlined in red here, and is on the right-hand side for us to use as a guide. So I'm going to read the headline together. I'm going to read the headline out loud, excuse me, and we're going to translate it together. Seif Chadash Nosaf Lechok Deri. Yachol Miyad. Tzeakot Bevada. Bizayon. Mechtaf. Okay, so let's understand what's happening here. Seif Chadash Nosaf Lechok Deri. Okay, I'm going to translate this first and then give you some context, because that's why this class is also important. It's not just about the literal Hebrew, it's the context in which we live here in Israel. Seif Chadash Nosaf Lechok Deri. Seif, as you see here at the top right, the vocab for today, seif means a clause or a section or a subsection. We usually talk about seifim. Any of you who have rented an apartment in Israel, any of you who have signed an employment contract, you know what seifim are. Those are the clauses. Those are the individual lines in any contract, just like in English or in French. We have them in Hebrew too. They're called seifim. Seifim are plural. Seif is a one clause. Okay. Seif Chadash, so not just any Seif, Seif Chadash. Chadash is new. So a new clause, and Nosaf, additional, an additional new clause, Lechok Deri, for the quote-unquote dairy law. What is this talking about? Remember, we are in the process of trying to form a new government. The Likud party, which is run by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has until this Wednesday to announce that he has a government. A government is 61 or plus members of Knesset who have already been sworn in, the 25th members of Knesset. They had a certain amount of time to form a coalition government that could be sworn in by Knesset. To be sworn in, you need at least a majority of Knesset members. There's 120 members of Knesset. Half of Knesset plus 1, 61. Okay, currently the coalition is 64 members. The purported coalition, we're going to get to that word in a second, that's a very important part of all this, has till Wednesday to form a formal coalition government and submit it before the Knesset what it's going to look like. What are the laws that they're going to advance? What are the who are the ministers going to be from the various parties of the coalition, and so forth. But in the meantime, Knesset is in session. Okay, there is no government, but there is a Knesset, and the coalition government, the potential coalition government, because they have a majority of Knesset seats, are able to push forward legislation by appointing a speaker of Knesset who determines what the agenda of the day is, as well as what we call the Vada Mesaderet. This is the arrangements committee. This is the committee that's in charge of running the Knesset and effectively running the country when there is no government. It's a very powerful committee because it can still push forward legislation, and it determines what gets pushed and what doesn't. Just like in a regular everyday government running with next to a Knesset and a coalition government, but without a coalition government. Okay, so what they're talking about here is that part of this coalition government is set to include 3 ministers with a necessity to change some of the laws to allow them to serve as ministers. The one they're talking about here is Aryeh Deri. This guy, as we saw over here in the illustration here on the left. Aryeh Deri is the chairman of the Shas party. Shas is now 10 or 11 seats in the Knesset. It's been around for, sorry, just one second. Sorry, just had a thing with the picture. Let me just make sure it comes back. Aryeh Deri has been in Knesset for a long time. He is the chairman of Shas. He's also has been convicted of tax evasion and various offenses with regards to taxes. As a result, and has been convicted, meaning that he has a suspended sentence against him. Let me just open this up again, sorry. If I can get it to open, where's our vocab? There it is. Great. Okay, sorry, let me just share my screen again. Wonderful. Okay. Right, let me just make sure that, double check that that works. There we go. Okay, so let me just make sure that we can see it. Yeah, okay, great. So this guy, he's the chairman of Shas. He has been convicted on tax evasion and other tax related offenses with a suspended jail time sentence. The law in Israel is a convicted, someone who's been convicted of a crime cannot serve as a minister of government. Chok Deri is a law that is meant to be passed so that Aryeh Deri and anyone convicted of certain past offenses can serve as a minister. Now, the intended coalition says that it's not a personal push for this legislation. It has nothing to do with Aryeh Deri per se, and yet its nickname is Chok Deri. It's clear by the pace by which the government, the intended government, is trying to push this through, i.e. ahead of Wednesday's deadline, to make sure that he can serve as a government. Because if he doesn't serve as a minister, and this is one of his stipulations in the coalition negotiations behind the scenes, Shas will likely not be part of the coalition government. The coalition government that's intended to be formed won't have a majority, it won't be elected, and will either end up in 2 scenarios. One, the president will give the mandate to another party to try to form a government, or will go to early elections. We've seen this happen in these last 5 rounds of elections. This is what it's all about, is how do we ensure this potential coalition partner can serve and potentially serve as finance minister. That's what he's looking for to do. But a law would need to be passed to amend the basic laws of Israel, which serve as the constitution, the de facto constitution, to allow a minister with a previous conviction to serve as a minister. Okay, so what is it saying again? Seif chadash nosaf lechok deri, a new additional clause to the dairy law. And what is this clause? And they know it's referring to it because this clause ends, this short sentence ends with a colon, right? What is it referring to? Quote unquote, Yachul miyad, right? You see here, it says here, Yachul miyad. Okay, what does that mean? Seif chadash nosaf lechok deri, a new additional clause to the dairy law, quote, Yachul miyad. You see here on the right-hand side, our next word, yachul. Yachul is a great word. It is a verb. You'll see this verb a lot. We use this verb a lot in Hebrew. It means to occur or to take place. So what does it mean? Yachul miyad. It will take place immediately. In other words, the idea is that if this law gets passed by the Knesset that allows a minister with a previous conviction to serve in a present or future government, it will be enacted immediately. Meaning there is no retroactive, there's no grace period, there's no frozen period. It also means that it would be enacted immediately by the government while still potentially being appealed by other members of the Knesset, if not by the Knesset's own attorney general or the state or any other parts of the state that can issue an appeal against it. Okay, so Yachul Miyad, this new provision within this law that would allow him to serve as a minister, it would take place immediately upon, it would go into effect immediately upon passing. Okay, period. Se'akot bevada, we're now in the middle of the second line here of the headline. Tzeakot bevada. Tzeakot is the plural of tzeaka, which means screaming, yelling, or yells, or screams, right? It's the verbal noun of litzok, which is to scream or to yell. So screams and yells bevada, in the committee, that committee I talked about before, that still is allowed to propose and generate legislation while there is no government. Tzeakot bevada. Screams and yelling in the committee, colon, and then you see the quotes again. So it's referring to something that was directly said. Bizayon mechtaf. Bizayon means contempt. It means anything bad in the sense of contempt, right? Not contempt necessarily in the legal sense, but something like scandal is also a way to think about bizayon. Okay, and mechtaf comes from the same verb that we use for to kidnap or kidnapping. So the idea is that they are trying to pull the wool over our eyes, right? That they are something is being pushed that is disrespectful, if not illegal, if not unconstitutional. That they're trying to push this new clause that just all of a sudden came up that only has gotten to the news and much less members of Knesset, and they're calling a bizayon mechtaf, a scandal, something terrible, a trying to run away with it. Let me see if I can get a better translation for mechtaf, because these aren't words that we necessarily use all the time. One of them, a sneaky interception, is one way to think of it, right? It's something sneaky is mechtaf. You're trying to sneak it in. Just like, right, like kidnapping, sneak away something. Bizayon is also a disgrace, not just contempt, it's disgraceful. Okay, what are they talking about? We have 30 minutes. I want to answer some of your questions, so I want to get through this as quickly as I can. I'm going to read this, try to go through at least most of this part here so I can leave room for questions. Okay, we've done the main headline. Now we're going to do as much as we can of the short introductory paragraph that explains what we're talking about here. And then if you wanted to read more, you could click on the link. Okay, but what I'm trying to point out here is how the headline is built. You see here the colons, The quotation marks, they tell you what's been said or what it's being referred to. Now I want you to focus on of all things, the tense of the verbs. This is really important when you're reading the news. And we've talked about this before, but here it is well illustrated. Okay, here I'm on the first line of the short paragraph under it. ברגע האחרון צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר סעיף חדש. Okay, ברגע האחרון. Okay, first two words here. ברגע האחרון. Rega, you all know this one. Rega, as we do here in Israel, rega means moment. When you do this and you say rega, it means wait a minute or wait a moment. But rega means a moment. ברגע האחרון, at the last minute, צורף. צורף is right here. צורף was attached. It is the past tense passive of the verb לצרף. An important verb. Anytime you need to attach something to an email, you're going to use the verb לצרף. צורף is the past tense passive, was attached. Why is that important to know? We've talked about this before, and now it's illustrated right here. In media Hebrew, in modern day Hebrew in general, but specifically in the media, and in literature, the passive tense is considered a higher form of Hebrew. It's the polar opposite from what many of us have been taught with regards to English. Certainly in North America, we're taught that passive is not good. In Hebrew, passive is very good. So when you can use passive, you will see it, particularly in the news. In this case, at the last minute, ברגע האחרון צורף. What was added צורף? We talked about that just in this headline, right? סעיף חדש נוסף. צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי. כשר. Okay, it was added to לחוק. חוק is a law. להכשרת דרעי כשר. Okay, הכשרה, we've talked about this word before. הכשרה can mean both to train something, to make something fit. It comes from the same root as kasher, the modern Hebrew way of how we say kosher. Kasher simply means fit. Chedo kosher is a gym, a fitness room. Okay, literally a fitness room. So to make deri, להכשרת דרעי כשר. Okay. להכשרת דרעי כשר. You could read that as kasher, but it really is kasar. What does it mean? To make deri fit to be a minister. Because again, the current law in Israel is, if you are convicted, you cannot serve as a minister in a government. So, ברגע האחרון צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר. Think of that whole part right there, that clause. לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר. 4 words is what it's being referred to. And in Hebrew, good Hebrew, old, also biblical Hebrew, the verb will often come before the subject and the object, right? In English, many other languages, including modern Hebrew, we do subject, verb, object. In biblical Hebrew and in really high-level modern Hebrew, we will also see verb, subject, object as the order of words in the sentence. So, צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר, סעיף חדש, right? סעיף חדש is going right back to that headline we talked about before. So, צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר, at the last minute, a סעיף חדש was added, צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר. Okay, you have to invert the sentence a little bit also because we're talking in the passive. So at the last minute was added, literally this set reads, at the last minute was added to the law to make dairy fit to be a minister, serve as a minister, a seif chadash, a new clause. Okay, so again, look for the passive. If you can't figure out the conjugation of a verb in news Hebrew, in media Hebrew, chances are it's the passive, because again, we love the passive in media, and this is why we can condense a lot of things into a short sentence. צורף לחוק להכשרת דרעי כשר סעיף חדש. Okay, and then what is that seif chadash? We already said what it is, right? Yechul miyad. 2 words, Yechul miyad. And if you look at the actual transcript, if you look at the actual law, you see here in Hebrew, and it's highlighted and circled, it says here, oh, I thought it said Yechul Miyad, but that's the idea that it's saying here, right? Instead of Yechul Miyad, easier, shorter Hebrew for the headline, explains a little bit more. Sheyavi leknisato letokef beofen miyadi. Okay, what does this all mean? Yavi leknisato is our next vocab on the right-hand side. Yavi leknisato, it literally translates to will bring about its entry. But that sounds really odd. It really is best translated as will result in its entry. Okay, yavi is the future tense of the verb lehavi, to bring. And la knisa, knisa is entry, entrance, right? We know knisa is an entrance or an entryway. It is also the ability to, the act of entering something. Okay, it's also a verbal noun as much as it is a location, an entrance. Okay, so that whole thing, instead of saying yachul miyad again, it's saying that this seif chadash, this new clause, yavi leknisato letokef beofen miyadi, that this making of Aryeh Deri into a person fit to be a minister, yavi leknisato letokef beofen miyadi, will result in its entry, meaning this law will come into entry, letokef, and it's emphasizing what we mean by entry. Letokef, tokef, as you see here as our next vocab word, effect. Any of you, tokef is a word we use all the time here in Israel in everyday Hebrew. If you are buying something on a phone, on the phone by credit card, the operator is going to ask you, after asking for your mispar kartis ashray, for your credit card number, they're going to ask for tokef. They're not going to even say the whole long way to say it. They're simply going to say tokef. Tokef is referring to the validity, the effectiveness of your card, how until when your card is issued, i.e. its expiration date. Okay, tokef is a word that we use all the time when it comes to validating your ticket on a bus or on a train. Think of it as effect or validity, right? Sheyavi leknisato letokef. The idea is that this new seif, if this law is passed, will mean that this seif will allow this law to come into effect, will come into tokef when beofen miyadi. Okay, beofen miyadi is our next vocab word here on the right-hand side. Beofen miyadi means immediately. Now, Hebrew is a very logical language. It's a very conservative language in a lot of ways. It's a very mathematical language. You can figure out how to make things very simple with one exception, and that is adverbs. Adverbs come in all sorts of shapes and sizes in Hebrew. The one way you can get around all the weird ways that adverbs exist in Hebrew is by using the word ofen or the word tzura. The ofen means manner. Okay, in the manner or in a way, right? So what they're saying here, and if you want to use it as an adverb, is that we'll bring this clause will bring the law into effect, will bring immediately. But of miyadi, miyad means immediate, miyadi means immediate as an adjective, but often miyadi is immediately an adverb. Okay, so if you want to create an adverb, there are many exceptions to this rule, folks. So if you've heard of other adverbs, great. We'll do a whole other class on adverbs because it's a little bit more complicated. But if you need to make an adverb on your own, all you have to use is the word ofen, and then whatever comes after it as an adjective will be the adverb. So when will it come into effect? Be'ofen miyadi, immediately. Okay, it's the beginning of the second line here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more because we're running out of time fast, and I want to be sure to get to your questions. This is also something I talked about before, so I want to make sure that I get to. But oppositia hamiyuedet, we're now in the second line, the first full sentence in it. But oppositia hamiyuedet ta'anu sheyesh lekayem דיון נוסף על הסעיף וצעקו. Okay? באופוזיציה המיועדת. Oppositia is the cognate. You can hear it from what it sounds like, opposition. Okay? מיועדת is the important word here. מיועדת, I have it here on the vocab on the right-hand side. Oops, sorry. Just make sure that you can see both. Right? Miuad means designated or intended. Okay, miuedet is simply the female conjugation of it. And so ha'oppositia miuedet, the intended or the designated opposition. Why is it called this? Remember what I said before, we don't have a government yet. We have till Wednesday to swear in a government led by the Likud party, because they're the ones who have the first crack at forming a coalition after our latest elections. And so the purported coalition, the one that we all assume is going to happen or is likely going to happen by Wednesday, if it takes place, the people who are in it, is the Koalitzia Hamiuedet. But just as there is a coalition in a parliamentary democracy, there's also an opposition in its legislative body. The opposition parties are the ones who aren't going to be a part of the coalition and are taking the opposition to it, meaning that they oppose the policies of the government, if not its existence, and seek to take over from it through democratic processes. Obviously, this is still a democracy, and it's very much a democracy here, folks. Ba'oppositia miuedet, the intended opposition, meaning we normally talk about ha'koalitzia miuedet, and that's who we're talking about here with this headline, right? This Aryeh Deri, this person who's supposed to be a a minister in the upcoming government. Conversely, there's an oppositia miuedet, there's an intended opposition. And they say ta'anu. Ta'anu means argued or claimed. This is also what we use, by the way, whenever you are charging your phone. It will say in Hebrew, if you have Hebrew enabled on your phone, bete'ina. Literally, it's arguing with it, but no, it's charging, right? So charged. The opposition charged, or the charged the other side with, or claimed or argued. Sheyesh lekayem diun nosaf ala seif. Those of you who have joined me in Cafe Oleh in previous lessons, or have you seen our lessons on commands and non-gendered communication, you know the construct of yesh plus an infinitive verb. This is a really important one that you're going to see again and again in the news as well. Yesh lekayem means one must do something. In this case, there must be or there must take place something. In this case, diyun nosaf, an additional meeting, an additional conversation, an additional discussion around, a discourse around. But yesh plus the infinitive means one must do something. What's great about this is you don't have, it's really polite Hebrew and formal Hebrew, and there's no conjugation, folks. So if you see a sign that says, yesh lechabot et hapelefon, right? One must turn off their phone, right? It's a really easy way to talk to everyone in the audience, regardless of gender and how many people are there, and be polite at the same time. One must or one should do something, yesh plus the infinitive of a verb. Yesh lekayem diun nosaf ala seif. The opposition, the intended opposition, claimed that there must be another conversation, another discussion raised or brought up on this clause. Okay, that's what they're saying in that bit right there. I'm going to stop here to do the rest of it. I would highly suggest all of you either take a screenshot of it right now or come back to it in a few days when this lesson goes up and finish translating the rest of this paragraph. I promise it's not very hard. I picked out the words here on the right-hand side that are the most important ones to pick out, that are probably more idiomatic than you're used to. But the point, though, is here to be able to look at a headline, to be able to take it apart. What are the words that are important to look at? What are the words and grammatical constructs that keep popping up? So like I said, things like the passive tense, Really important to focus. And there's not going to be vowels, as you see here on the left-hand side. There won't be vowels. So how does it look? Look at it compared with vowels and not vowels. How do I recognize patterns to see, is this verb passive or active? What are the clues that this is a direct quote or it's referring to something? Those things with the colons and the quotes, right? And do I want to keep reading or not? Is this worth my time is also obviously very important. Do I need to translate every single word, or can I do a global translation and then move along because it doesn't immediately affect me? We're going to do these lessons again and again because it's really important. This lesson may be a little too esoteric for some of you, or too nuanced, or many of you may be thinking I'm too partisan by talking about something like this. This, folks, is the news right now. It's really big news that, 5 elections in 3 years. We're waiting to see this government being formed. There are 3 major pieces of legislation that are dependent on this government being formed. So that's why it's making the top news. This isn't me choosing this headline. Also, that's quite important. This is Ynet, one of Israel's most popular news outlets across political ideologies, mind you. Okay, let me stop here. We're running out of time. I want to answer some of your questions in the Q&A. Harold says, Wikipedia defines Yediot as center left. Is that wrong? I would say that's not so right. Right meaning correct. Yediot of all the major media outlets is the one who's going to take the least, or is going to be the last one to take a stance on things. They have both left and right voices weigh in on their op-ed section, and they make it very clear when something is an op-ed and commentary and so forth. I would say they're one of the more objective ones in that I can read that headline and there's nothing that says anything that I could consume as bias. For example, in that headline we just read, let me show that again. What's important here also is that this is for a native Israeli audience. So they know all the things. When you say the name Ali Deri, they know his history. So they're also not referring back to him being a convicted person, right? If they were kept saying, using the word convicted, that might indicate bias. They're not saying that here. They're only talking about him being fit to serve as a minister without referring to his past grievances. It could be argued from a left-right standpoint, or just an ideological or bias standpoint, that if they kept referring to his previous convictions or calling him convicted, that would showcase for bias. Here, they're not saying any of that. So it's a little bit, I would say Ynet, again, is one of the more objective sources of news with regards to that. I would also say Wikipedia is not always a great source, because we know how easy it is to edit Wikipedia articles to make them themselves biased. But that's a great question, Harold. Thank you for asking. What exactly is a cognate? Great question. A cognate, I'm going to talk about cognates all the time in modern Hebrew because modern Hebrew is full of them. Cognate is a word that's borrowed from another language to be used with almost the same meaning. So things like, for example, oppositia. Oppositia is not Hebrew, folks. We've Hebraicized the word to sound like Hebrew, right? That itzia at the end indicates that it's a noun, usually a noun that ends with tion or sion. But oppositia is simply the word opposition turned into sounding like Hebrew. That's a cognate, a word that we take from another language and using its almost exact same meaning here in our language. In this case, the word opposition, oppositia, meaning the opposition in a government. Cecil, recommendations for online translation services. Always happy to recommend Context Reverso. Just type in Context Reverso and you'll get to its link. You can only do 1 words at a time. Excuse me. You can only do a few words at a time or single expressions. So it's not a full bulk translation like Google Translate. The problem with Google Translate, it's usually about 50 to 60% accurate. it misses the ball on a lot of things. Context reverso for individual words is really good. It will also give you sample sentences in English and in Hebrew, and sometimes with audio for those words. Bizayon, like I said, is shame. It's contempt. It's, what's the other word I use? Disgrace. Bizayon is if you are convicted of, if a judge convicts you of bizayon in court, they are convicting you of contempt. But bizayon also means shame. Okay. Graham asks, what is bechol ofen? Bechol ofen means anyways. Okay. In any matter, in all matters. But bechol ofen as a idiomatic expression means anyways. Okay. Lucy asks, I couldn't hear what is a better app to use other than Google Translate. Context Reverso, CONTEXT space REVERSO, Reverso. Okay, just type it into whatever search engine you use. You'll get the link to it. It's a great resource, Context Reverso. Okay. Any last questions in the Q&A about this lesson? Okay, so as I said, today was about Ynet. In other lessons like we've done in the past and we will do in the future, you will see, I'm just going to refresh so you can see Ynet again. We'll look at other media outlets. Again, we're going to look at ones that are widely read by Israelis. We're not going to look at niche ones. Okay, so that's really important. I see some of you recommending certain media outlets. We're going to look at mainstream media outlets, outlets that the majority of Israelis will consume, things like Ynet, certain of the TV stations that also have news outlets, some of the other newspaper outlets, and so forth. We'll also look at ones with easy Hebrew. So if this was hard, we're going to look at even easier Hebrew news outlets in the future, but just know we're going to look at an array of them. We're not necessarily going to do it by demographics and by ideology, folks. So if you are recommending ones, whether on either side of whatever spectrum you would like, this is not the place for it. This is about reading the news regardless of what outlet there is. And we're focusing on the ones that are the most mainstream because that usually means that the Hebrew is also the most accessible. Your ideology is your ideology, just as mine is mine. This is not that class. You heard me. I was not pushing my personal politics here. We were just translating what Ynet, one of Israel's biggest media outlets, was reporting. Okay, with that, we're going to stop here. Otherwise, it's going to take quite a bit longer, I think, to translate the rest of that article. But like I said, you can easily do that now with the skills that I've given you on your own. We'll do another class on media literacy in the next few weeks. In the meantime, next week, we will be talking about, as it is the end of Chanukah, it is also the end of the what we call Shana Ezrachit, the secular year in Israel, or the Gregorian calendar, however you'd like to call it. But in Israel, we call it Hashana HaEzrachit, the civil year, meaning it's not Hashana HaIvrit, not the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar. Right, so it's the end of the Shana Ezrachit. It's the end of Chanukah. We're going to be talking about blessings, wishes, and curses. Three things everyone uses on a regular basis here in Israel in everyday conversation in all sorts of different languages. You're going to want to know not just the classic ones of blessings and indeed curses. We're going to make it still PG-13 here because I trust you all to be responsible adults with using these and learning them. I'm also going to teach you how to construct your own blessings and curses. It's a very similar construct to one another, and we're going to together listen to a classic Israeli song that's all about blessings. So as we end this Shana Ezrachit, this civil year, I think that's a great way to top it all off. So as always, Toda Rabba, thank you all for joining. This lesson will be up on YouTube along with the spreadsheet, along with all that information the next few days on youtube.com. And I will see you all next Monday. Take care, Lehitraot.